Welcome to the Coping Podcast, where we share strategies for coping with the stressors of life, especially the difficulties of parenting. And here is your host, Dr. Lee Weiss.
This is Dr. Lee Weiss. I am the host of the Coping Podcast, where I feature top experts on topics like raising healthy children, parenting, and so much more. Past guests include Dr. Ellie Leibowitz, neuropsychologist Dr. Lisa Novak, nutritionist Lara Field, and many more. Just a quick disclaimer, the information provided is for educational and informational purposes only. This is not intended to provide mental health treatment and does not constitute a client-therapist relationship. The information provided is not a replacement for being assessed and evaluated by a licensed professional and is not intended to replace mental health or medical advice. This episode is brought to you by Coping Partners. Coping Partners is a mental health practice in the Chicago suburbs dedicated to helping children, adolescents, and adults. We help manage various challenges, including anxiety, divorce, behavioral issues, relationship problems, and much more. Check out more episodes of our podcast and our website at copingpartners.com, and you can contact us with any questions you have. So before we dive into today's topic, I wanted to introduce you to our guest, Dr. Debra Kissen. Dr. Debra Kissen is a licensed clinical psychologist and the CEO and founder of Light on Anxiety. And she is also an internationally recognized speaker and author committed to translating clinical research into practical tools for her clients and the broader community. She has co-authored several books, including Overcoming Parental Anxiety, the Panic Workbook for Teens, Rewire Your Anxious Brains for Teens, and more. Outside of her professional life, Dr. Kissen is the proud mother of 3 teenagers, so she can relate to this topic personally as well. So today we're going to focus on Dr. Kissen's most recent book, Overcoming Parental Anxiety, Rewire Your Brain to Worry Less and Enjoy Parenting More. So thank you for being here, Dr. Kissen. I think parenting has always been the hardest and most underpaid job out there. And I actually love how you put it in the book. It starts by saying, if you had to put out a job post for being a parent, the job post would say something like, help wanted, 24 hours, 24/7 are the hours, no days off, no salary. The job demands constant stress and fatigue, and occasionally feeling like your heart is being ripped out of your chest. Moments of joy are possible, but not guaranteed. So it tickled me how you put it, but it's true that parenting can be really hard sometimes. And of course, joy and fulfilling at other times. And it seems like parents these days are struggling more than in past generations. So I first wanted just to ask you, what motivated you to write this book? Where did this kind of idea come from?
Well, and I love this question. It's really exciting kind of reviewing the journey backwards. All of our book projects really have come from a clinical need. So starting with the first book that I wrote with my colleagues around treating panic disorder. So through sessions with clients and seeing different demands that mental health consumers, their struggles, the motivation normally comes from where might there be a gap in the kind of resources that people need. So in working, we specialize in anxiety treatment for children, adolescents, and adults. And in the work with children, adolescents, you also always end up working with parents. And I think realizing that so many of the struggles that parents were having, they felt like it shouldn't be so hard. And so when we were trying to work with parents, maybe on even if your child is having a meltdown about going to school, that doesn't mean giving in to and letting them stay home from school. So when we're trying to give parents these tools on how to work on some of their accommodations or assist their children challenging moments, they would feel like I know I shouldn't do it, and it's just so hard. I don't know why it's so hard for me to handle these moments. The reason it's so hard to handle moments when your child is in distress is because the parent brain, you're so deeply interconnected with your child, and you're supposed to be, for survival purposes, little human little babies, like we need to tend to them and we need to feel what they feel, but that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily stop
Mhm.
throughout their lives. And there are a lot of times we're feeling what they feel. And so even if it's an ineffective emotion where they're, oh no, it's going to be terrible to go to this party, then we
Right.
feel what they feel. And so I wanted
Right.
parents to have a tool to realize that it's not just you, it really is complicated and you're feeling for two.
Wow.
And it's not just that you're just not
Failing
able
your
to
job.
navigate it. Yeah.
Right, right. No, and in the book, you explain beautifully how the parent brain is really wired, like you said, for, attunement, for empathy, for nurturing, for caretaking of our children. And we have these mirror neurons that actually fire, and so we really do feel their pain. We really do feel their joy. Um,
Hmm.
so it is a little bit tricky to navigate. How do you make the right choice as a parent, like you said, to not give in when the child says, I can't go to school, I can't go to
Hmm.
school, when you're feeling their fear or their anxiety in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot that that we feel and we care and we love. And so that was really the motivation of kind of what is a toolbox of emotional regulation and
Mhm.
distress tolerance, and what other ways can we handle all of these big, powerful moments to be the effective parents that we hope we can be.
For sure. And we're going to get into the tools because I know
Oh, okay.
that's what we want to hear. But
Exciting.
no, but not quite yet. I was going to say,
Okay. All right.
teach us a little bit about why it is that we are as parents on such high alert for threats. Like why are we wired this way?
Well, it makes sense from a for survival purposes uh to have more false positives. So if you see your with your child moving through the forest and there's a big shadow, to assume that's a bear and not the shadow of a tree. Or if you hear a noise in the middle of the night, not, oh, that's just the wind against the window, but that might be someone trying to break in. So
Mhm.
by assuming by our brain saying, no, no, it's danger. And then the worst that happens is we're planning for something that doesn't happen. So it's helpful for survival. It's just not helpful for peace of mind
Mhm. Mhm.
and having less experiences of false alarm. But
Mhm.
our brains and bodies have been made for survival. Our ancestors that were like, oh, that's not a poisonous snake, that's a stick. They're not around as much as the genes of the people that were more on
Right.
high alert.
Right. So essentially there are times where this, we'll call it overactive part of our brain. There's times where that really serves a purpose and
Very much
keeps
so.
us or our
Yeah.
kids in this case really safe from danger.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah.
about when someone's crossing the street and may not be paying attention. You're like, no, you have to look both ways and you're
Right.
grab. I'm like, that serves a purpose. It's life and death. Um,
Right.
but I think that for most of us, our parent brains are on high alert, like constantly.
Right.
And so we have more of these false alarms. Can you give us an example of a time where it might not be life or death, but your kind of alarm signals are going off as a parent when you're worrying about your kid?
Um, so many. So my brain is flooded with, okay, so just in the last few hours, what kind of examples? But well, for example, it's college season. I have a senior in high school, and she had applied ED to college, and a couple of days before getting the decision was starting to have this panicky, like, oh no, what if I made the wrong decision and I'm going to be trapped, and what if this wasn't the right decision? And my wise mind feels very confident that like it's all going to be okay, and good enough decisions are good enough, and either way it's going to be fine. But in those moments of what did I do, and her suffering was my suffering. So
Right.
try to use tools in those moments of noticing like the dread and the despair that I'm feeling, and not necessarily like reacting or calling the school and trying to pull the plug and saying, can we just kidding. I
Right.
don't want to eat to eat. But like the urges to, oh
Right.
no, like her pants are on fire and I need to find
Right.
a bucket of water. It
Right.
feels that much.
Right. It feels
So
really intense.
yeah,
Absolutely. I'm
yeah.
thinking of even a younger example
Mm.
that comes to mind for me is like, we get parents a lot who are just, again, understandably distressed because their child wasn't invited to something,
Hmm.
like a
That's a
sleepover or
great.
whatnot. And it
Oh,
happens
that's
every
a
day.
great,
And they're
great
hysterical. And
example.
and I really,
Right.
again, as a parent, I feel for them. It's so hard to see your child in pain. But like you said, it is not, right, the kind of safety situation where we really want to overfunction, but parents, of course, get equally upset as their kids in these types of situations oftentimes.
Yeah, or sometimes more depending on like their own journey through life. So I really like what you're saying in terms of modern living. Our brain was created, a long time ago for a lot of different kind of challenges, much more life lions and tigers and bears and immediate threats. And thank goodness in modern life, there are some of them we need to tend to, but most of the stressors are maybe taking a test and there was some material that you didn't realize was going to be on it. Might
Right.
not be great, but not life or death. Or
Right.
not being invited to a party. That doesn't mean the tribe is going to leave you in the middle of the woods to fend for yourself for the rest of life. But our
Yeah.
brains are
Are
wired when it
hardwired.
comes to those uh,
Yeah.
real immediate threats that do have the life or death consequences.
No, makes sense. Can you
Hmm.
tell us a little bit about how a child's distress can feed a parent's distress and how the parent's distress can then feed the child's distress and lead to this loop? Like, give us an example of that.
Yeah. So kind of like there's an anxiety cycle just within all of us anyway. So as an individual, we might, oh no, I feel really anxious. I have to go to I don't know, a dinner or like let's say a coffee at the school, and I'm not going to know any parents. Okay, maybe I just won't go. Ah, I feel better. So when we have an anxious thought, and then if we engage in a behavior, then we'll feel better. But we might get short term relief, but long term, we've just avoided and taught our brain we couldn't handle it. So
Mhm.
it's internally, there's like an anxiety cycle that occurs
Mhm.
between parent and child and the mirror neurons. There's this, let's say a child like, oh no, I don't want to go to the party. I won't know anyone, and maybe like having a tantrum and
Mhm.
freaking out. And then the parent mirror neurons might either like stop yelling, there's nothing wrong, and start yelling back at the yelling child, or maybe try to rescue the child, like, okay, you don't need to go. And then if in that moment you yell, what that becomes is like a distraction. The child, instead of having to learn to tolerate that moment, instead they're just attending to your big emotions. So uh, either the power struggle in that moment,
Mhm.
or just watching your parent flip their own lid. Now they're no longer kind of making contact with the challenging feelings that we're all going to have at some times and need to learn how to get
Mhm.
through. But it's kind of short circuited through this now interaction with
Mhm.
the parent. And then often that could lead to either avoidance of the activity or
Right.
distraction. And then the brain gets reinforced of the child, like, wow, I really couldn't handle that. And they
Yeah.
don't have the corrective experience that, like, okay, if I went, I didn't know that many people, I'd,
Right.
I'd survive.
So in that situation, it's a good example. What would you want the parent in that situation to do? In a perfect world, if they were able to be regulated, how would they handle
Hmm.
that child's distress?
So, and I would say just assuming the fact that this is a perfectly acceptable as a parent, like knowing if you're sending you've maybe picked a camp for your child, and knowing your best guess that this is going to be a perfectly okay experience. Like say there was going to be a party where it was 20 bullies and they were going to be
Yeah.
laughed at the whole time. We don't want to ever set anyone up for
Right.
failure. So assuming that this is whether an acceptable school for them or a party or a camp, and they're like, I can't do it, I don't want to go. um and it also depends on the age of the child, what would be like the, I guess, A response would be step one, validating. Like, yes, I see you're feeling, I see this is really hard. Like, those feelings are real. Sometimes what we might do is, it's fine, you're fine. It's not a big deal.
Just dismiss it.
And right. And then that just gets sort of that they then have to prove why it is a big deal. And so instead, like and I'm sorry that this is hard for you. I wish it weren't. And I believe in you, because it has to be something you actually believe is
Mhm.
a fair challenge for them. Like I wouldn't, and I believe you could go fly that plane right now. Like, no, I don't believe that because you don't know how to do that. But this is something that, as a parent, you believe, minus their anxieties and fears, it's a
Mhm.
perfectly fair challenge.
Mhm.
And then, sort of like, listen, I'm going to be in the car. This is happening. And, I can't convince you it's going to be okay, but
Mhm.
it's happening. You're going to go
Right.
and we'll see after the fact
Right. Right.
what's happening.
But just staying calm seems like an important part of that too.
Right.
And of course, naming their emotion, empathizing,
Hmm.
giving them some confidence that they can handle whatever it is that they're afraid of, um, without dismissing all of it. So
Right.
it sounds like good advice. How would you say, and again, this might get into
And I
some
guess one thing
stuff.
just to add is
Yeah.
less is more when it comes to speaking. As a parent, we I love speaking. Like it's soothing. But they're not actually listening to us. At the point that their amygdala, their fear brain is activated, it's no longer, they're not thinking and considering. And so no matter what we say,
Right.
they're not going to get at that point to like, okay, yeah, you're right. Like that's not happening.
Right.
So it's
So
more
keep
of
it
like a
short and
signal. You keep
sweet.
it short because no matter what, they're not really listening. But if you're sending the signal like,
Right.
I believe in you and I love you
Right.
and this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes people wait for the sign that like, okay, now they agree to it or now they believe they're going to be able to handle it. That will come later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So if parents, mirror neurons are firing and they are feeling really, really also fearful or wound up by their child's emotions, what's one strategy for the parent to be able to like actually start from a place of calm rather than get hysterical with the child?
Hmm. And so uh, there's so many different emotional regulation skills. I would say like knowing yourself.
Mhm.
For one person, a really slow, gentle breath is super helpful. But for some people who might have a sensitivity to their breath, sometimes doing like square breathing, like the idea of slowing down your breath does send a signal to your brain.
Mhm.
I'm okay. So, and it could be you kind of breathe. We could try it together. So we're going to breathe in for 4, and then we're going to hold for 4. It's a square, and then breathe out for 4, and then hold for 4. And what we're trying to work against is when we're in fight or flight mode, we're like, we might not even know we're hyperventilating because it could just be like tiny little rapid breaths, but our we're taking all this oxygen because our brain thinks we need to fight or free or flee. And so it's like all this fuel because like something big's happening. So
Right.
by taking in less, slowing down, and taking less oxygen, we're sending a signal like, I don't actually need all this fuel because there's not a
Mhm.
true problem. So it does help unless people get really stuck on their breath. And
Yeah,
then
there's
they
other
just might need to work
strategies
on it.
if
Yeah.
that's the case. But no, I think you always have your breath with you, and
Yeah.
research shows this is very effective. It's hard in the moment, right? When your
Yeah.
child is flooded with emotions to
Yeah.
do that, but it can be a conscious choice.
Right.
It's kind of like when parents slow down their talking
Yeah.
if the kid is getting like faster and
Right.
faster. It's the same concept of like, what can I do to show calm for them because they need that to
Right.
relate, and so I don't, fly off the handle.
Right. And we can even role play. Like, for example, like I could either be a kid getting really activated in your face and you could try because people are like, how can I do that
Yep,
in that same moment? Or
yep,
you could be an activated kid and I can do my slow breath. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the?
I'll be the easy part. I'll be the kid.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't know which one you were going to call the easy part. Okay, so jump into any situation that you can imagine of big kid emotions, and I'm going to try to slow myself down.
Okay. Let's
And it
see.
could be the kid not want to go to the party, like not want to go to school, whatever
Right.
you want.
Okay. How about not wanting to go to school?
Okay.
Okay. So I'll say I can't go to school because I have a huge test and at last test I failed and I'm going to fail again. And I just I can't go. I'm not prepared. I studied as best I can, but I'm not, it's not going to go well. Mom, you can't
Okay.
make me go. You can't make me go.
Okay. I hear you. And I know this is a lot. And I know that you can handle it. And we're just going to have to make this happen. And so I'm going to be in the car. Give yourself a couple minutes. And at 7 a.m., like, I'm going to expect you to be in the car joining me. So I'm going to be waiting for you. I'll be right outside. So as you were doing that, and it might feel really funny, but I was kind of slowing down my breath in that moment because I felt myself going faster as you were going faster. So that was
Mhm.
very good.
And I didn't have
And so,
tears or any of the extra dramatics.
right. And even you just doing that, I felt I was
Yeah.
going faster. So and kind of just taking that moment of it feels like I don't have time to
To slow down.
slow down my breath. But
Mhm.
just even if it's 30 seconds of slowing it down, that's sending a signal. Like if I have time to slow down my breath in that moment, actually my pants are not on fire. So
Right.
giving yourself the gift of that tiny slice of time will pay off.
I love
That's
that.
just one little tool in the
No,
toolbox.
it's super helpful. Um, I was going to say in your book, I know
Hmm.
you have several different chapters that are all extremely user-friendly things for parents to do.
Hmm.
And the first one I really loved, which was self-compassion.
Hmm.
Because I think as parents, when I work with parents, I feel like I hear this voice of, I can't get it right. Why am I failing as a parent? Really critical, harsh language. And I think about these are really nice people who would never say that to a friend in the exact same situation. So why are they being so hard on themselves? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, self-compassion in parenting and like why is it so low? And what can we do
Hmm.
to like consciously work on, being kinder to ourselves?
Yeah. And so kind of similar to all the things that we do and think, everything has a purpose until the purpose is no longer valuable. So having critical thoughts, having feelings of remorse or contemplating, okay, that didn't work. What can I do differently? Like, mm, okay, I'm just thinking, okay, so let's say it's the weekend and I should at a certain point like get my kids off technology somehow and like plan a fun an activity and just something that we could do as a family and get moving, but it's just so much easier right now, like everyone's quiet, everyone's on their technology. So that motivation of like okay, it's probably not great that we've all been like locked on technology for hours and it's a Saturday, and that feeling of like that little bit of ickiness, like maybe there's something else to do, that can be motivating, that feeling of, or after something happens like um uh
Like if you lost your temper or something.
okay, yeah, so like just flipping your lid and like that's it, like go to bed and like enough, and kind of
Yeah.
scaring them to the point of like, okay, we're going to bed, but nobody's happy. And so kind of having that moment of like, all right, is there a different way that I can handle that? Like
Mhm.
that sounds like the shriekiness of my mom. I want to do better. So that discomfort can allow for some reflection and then some like rethinking and planning for next time. But what happens is that, for modern living, we just kind of get stuck in the ruminating or the worrying, and instead of just a little jolt enough to consider how to do it differently, we just kind of get stuck over and over again ruminating like you're
Mhm.
terrible, it's awful. And then when it goes from just being like a little bit of a shock, like, that wasn't great, to over and over again, you're awful, you're the worst mom, no wonder your kids are messed up. We just get sort of smaller and less motivated and able to make changes. So the point of it is for corrective action. But when we
Right.
just get stuck
Right.
reviewing all the ways that we suck, like corrective action gets a lot less likely.
Totally. Totally. No, that makes a lot of sense. So is one
So
of your
self-compassion.
I
Yeah.
was going to say, is one of your steps to kind of identify when as parents you personally get into that stuckness or into that cycle?
Right. So kind of the step one is like tracking when are the moments, like getting to know yourself critical moments and thoughts. And we all have them, but they're going to be personal too. Like, oh, when I don't reach, when I can't get my kids off technology, or when
Mhm.
my kids are struggling at school, or they don't want to spend any time with me. So kind of noticing when you're having this feeling or
Mhm.
thought of like you're the worst, or why
Mhm.
can't you do what everyone else is doing. So noticing that those moments, and it can start with just bad feelings, and tracking like, okay, what are the thoughts,
Mhm. Mhm.
and keeping a little log, because sometimes it just shows up as just like maybe you just feel depressed, and we just want to become more of a scientist observing what's
Mhm.
underneath the misery are a lot of different
Right.
chatter.
Right.
And then from there, you could decide within those self-critical themes, like what change is possible? What
Mhm.
do I just need to accept? And and then you could start working on replacing some of the self-critical thoughts with, okay, I'm working on this, or I'm good enough. But we can't trick
Mhm.
ourselves into like, you're good enough, you're a great mom. If we don't feel like that,
Mhm.
we certainly can't just like come back with really positive things we don't believe. So we have to find some areas that we do believe. I
Right.
am working on this, and I'm not going to be perfect.
Right. Right. I was going to say, usually we help kids and adults be like detectives, I would say, and figure
Yeah,
out, is
nice.
there a time you did do it right? Or is there a time
Right.
fly off the handle, and chances are, right, there's many times that you are doing a good enough job, but you're focusing and spiraling on that one time that you really blew up and it felt really catastrophic in that moment.
Right. No, I really like what you're saying in terms of just it's catastrophic, and it doesn't mean replacing it with the other extreme, but with much more balanced, realistic. Am I always terrible? Am I
Right.
always a disaster? Like,
Right.
what is the evidence that in fact at every single moment I'm a disaster? Like, if
Right.
you had to prove that in the court of law,
Right.
would you be able to have gotten gotten the kids to school today, or gotten dressed? Would any of these things happen if you're really actually always a disaster?
Right. Absolutely. Um,
Hmm.
other other strategies or other things that you speak about in the book, you talk about the gift of your presence. Can you tell us
Hmm.
more about kind of what you mean about how to
Mm.
be present and find more joy?
Yeah. I was just thinking like the other day with my daughter, my 13-year-old, who was trying to get some work done, and she was sitting next to me, and she was saying things, and I was like, uh-huh, uh-huh. Like I heard her. If she quizzed me, I heard her. But she's like, I think then she started talking to my dog and was like, wouldn't it be so nice to actually feel heard and seen, Bowie? And she was like, wouldn't it be nice to just feel, and someone was actually like looking at you and hearing you. I was like, that's a very fair point. Um, yes, I'm looking at you and I'm hearing you. So it was a good remind. All of these things,
Sure.
we have a toolbox of tools, but then finding moments to actually use them. So none of us are going to be always present, giving the gift of our mindful
Acute.
presence to our child. But
Mhm.
even 2 minutes of like, you could, and you don't have to tell them, but like setting a timer for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I'm going to like whatever they're saying. And no matter the age, if
Right.
they're a little kid, like I'm going to play a game with them. And
Yeah.
as you're playing the game, you might notice your tension, like, oh, okay, when am I going to, what time's the store close? I still have to make
Yeah.
dinner. And then just notice that thought, and then bring your attention back to this moment. And then another thought comes up, and it's like you're taking your gently bringing your attention back.
Mhm.
And the key is like without judgment. And then if you notice the judgment, like, why can't I just pay attention to my kid? Like,
Yeah.
then notice that and keep bringing it back. So
Mm-hmm.
and when it comes to mindfulness, people feel like sometimes they need to go on a month-long retreat or study with gurus, or it's really just about like teeny bursts of attentional training
Right.
versus um something that maybe you don't have a half an hour. You probably don't have a half an hour, but 2 minutes of just
Right.
like imagining your attention and just
Right.
it's like a spotlight and
Right.
putting it on your child.
No, I love that. And I think, it, first of all, it brings you as the parent joy.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually able to engage in that way. And I think it's incredibly refueling to the child
Mm-hmm.
to be seen and to have that level of like attunement. In
Mm-hmm.
today's fast-paced world where we all have way too much on our plates, way too spread thin, it's hard to really focus our attention and not notice the mind drifting. But like you said, just being reasonable and realistic with like,
Mm-hmm.
let's start here with this time. Put the
Mm-hmm.
electronics in a different room, like really focus on it and be
Mm-hmm.
present and see kind of like the gift of that for both you and your child.
Yeah. And within that minute, like we talk about like
Yeah.
monkey mind, like it might be 80 times, 90 times, but the magic happens each time we notice that our tension left and then we gently bring it back. That's like doing
Yeah.
lifting tiny little weights. And each time that we do that, that's really the mindfulness muscle is choosing where to place our attention. So
Right.
instead of, I think sometimes people feel like it's not working or it's
Right.
frustrating, like it's gonna be frustrating because it's hard. That doesn't mean it's not working.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um,
Hmm.
well, I'm going to give you a choice. Which of the next
Oh,
one do you
fun
want to focus?
choice.
I like having these skills that are very,
Ooh,
again, very
okay.
practical. So
Hmm.
choosing reality over catastrophe or freedom from the
Hmm.
past. What do you want to focus on next?
I think this is fun. Thank you. It's like a choose your own adventure. So that was
Yes.
very fun. I think we talked a little bit about the catastrophic thinking with the trying to be self compassionate. So we could talk a little bit about like freedom from your past in
Yeah.
terms of as a parent, we all by definition have past, and there are certain moments when the stickier, the more sucked into these moments we are, the more it might be about our own situation. So if you find there's certain areas of parenting your child where you get more reactive and you have more catastrophic thoughts and you get kind of like fused with the situation, like oh no, they didn't get invited to this party, and oh no, like in this class, like they're the friends from last year, they are not there, and then they're going to end up in their own group, and then you just having all these like big emotions that may not be into like in line
In
with the
proportion.
situation.
Right.
And it's harder to just use realistic thinking that no matter what, you're just so sucked into it. Like there are certain situations that we could be like, okay, I guess this is actually okay. And there are other situations that we say they're sticky or they're hot, big, hot, messy feelings that we're just like really locked in.
Mhm.
And then those are times that you might need some help from the sidelines, and it takes a little bit more work to
Love
either
that.
reprocess memories or to get unstuck from that situation. So I would say either with a professional or even starting to do one of those logs of what are the times that you just feel extremely emotionally reactive and so concerned for your child, and then just kind of take a few moments to like notice what comes up with that. And so you could either do like a downward arrow, like, oh no, they didn't get invited to the party. What's going to be so bad about that? Well, they're going to feel left out. What's going to be so bad about that?
Mhm.
They're going to get really depressed. And what's so bad about that? They're going to feel really hopeless and have suicidal ideation. I just kind of see where
Mhm.
the the situations lead to core fears. And then when you're with that core fear, trying to kind of wind back in your own life, is there any moments that you have that fall into that space? And
Mhm.
then like the next question is sort of how many of these have been worked through? We've all had hard moments, but the key is the past showing up feeling like the present.
Right. It's
Or
not as quite as resolved as you would wish.
right,
Yeah.
right. So in those moments, your brain sort of feels like here and now is then and there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I threw a lot of
No,
concepts out
no.
with that, but
I think it's really helpful. In fact, when we're working with parents, and I'm sure you do this as well, sometimes when we feel like parents are really heightened, we will say, "Do you relate to anything
hmm
this year?" Let's say it was like, again, I don't know, fifth
hmm
grade. Is fifth grade
hmm
tricky for you in any way that you can remember? And often we'll get stories like, "Oh yeah,
hmm
that was the year that this kid Johnny bullied me." And
hmm
it changed my middle school years after that, right? And you're like, aha, light bulb moment.
hmm
So
right,
sometimes helping them see that like this one situation that your son in fifth grade is in isn't feeling good to your son, but actually it's not the same level of intensity.
right.
But your reaction and your intensity is like up here, and it has more to do with your fifth grade experience that maybe you need to talk about with someone, really, truly.
hmm Right.
And
We talk
so,
about like big T traumas and little T traumas. And
yep,
sometimes it's harder where the little moments that really get stuck in there of just feeling like alone,
yep,
abandoned, rejected. And people normally come back to a story of like sitting at the lunch table for like half of the school year, feeling alone, like waiting to be made
right,
fun of.
right.
Um, and then what we might do is some like cognitive processing therapy of like, okay, so what picture yourself and what were you wearing? What does your face look like? And we're just kind of we're making room for that memory
Mhm.
versus kind of trying to push it away. And in doing that, it's like our brain then finds a place to like cover it. It doesn't mean it's going to be there. This moment happened to you, but it's not just super activated
Yeah.
and as like,
Yeah.
uh,
As fresh.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
hmm
And actually, one more thought on the freedom from your past tool. We should say get freedom from your past. I ran a group really early on in my training for middle school moms
hmm
and middle school daughters. And
I'm just closing my window, but I
oh,
fully
you're
hear you.
fine.
Keep going.
We would hear
Okay.
about, the child or the middle school girl drama, but then
hmm
separately, not together, separately, we'd have the moms meet. And usually there were stories that were kind of like parallel to what was
hmm
happening. And as soon as we were able to work with the moms and really help them with that piece,
That's so
they were
interesting.
able to help their daughters way more effectively and not be like meddling
Mm,
and not be as kind of like mean spirited about how they talk about the other moms, which is how the
right.
girls would talk about each other. And
That's it
was
amazing.
really a
That's
cool
so
experience.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Finding your
so
calm.
amazing. I love that. Yeah.
Tell us about finding your calm.
Huh. Finding your calm. That I got to remember what chapter would find,
Or
right.
relinquishing control. I was going to say one more
Ah,
time for all of them. You pick again. I like the choose
yeah.
adventure.
I'm pulling my book
Yes.
open because actually we wrote this book, but then since then we wrote a child like a play-based child anxiety book. So this one was a little further out, which is
Sure.
fun. Okay, so either relinquishing control or finding your calm. So I would say either is a good direction, but maybe we go with relinquishing control in terms of well, just such a challenging for parents. One of the hardest parts about this job that nobody would apply for was just listed as a job is that we are accountable for the um their success and them being healthy and them living a good life, yet in terms of how much control we actually have from the little things to the big things is not that much control. And so it really is kind of a rigged situation of like we would do anything that we could if we could
Right.
guarantee that everything will be okay.
Right.
But yet, and especially as kids get older, but at all points there's just so much that we actually can control
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of helping to move past that uh, trying to do the impossible of pretending that just because we say wear your coats, they're going to wear their coats, or you have to eat more vegetables, because at the end of the day, a child can
Mm-hmm.
choose what they eat. So, kind of giving parents tools to relinquish and accept that which they can't control.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was going to say, like, often parents, when they go into that place of self blame, right, they'll be like, it's all my fault that blah, blah, blah happened. Right. And, you're like, well, you have three kids, right? Do all three have this specific problem or outcome? No. Like, so it's probably not all your fault, and nor is it all in your control. And just identifying what are the factors. There's inborn temperament. There's some kids make bad decisions because they actually have reasons for that. Maybe they're impulsive, the way they're wired, their brains are wired, all kinds of different factors. And so just kind of acknowledging that we're doing the best we can as parents, but that
Right.
we cannot control all these outcomes. Who your friend is friends with affects a lot of their decisions, right? Like we can
Hmm.
steer them in one direction, but at the end of the day, they're going to choose, they're going to make mistakes. And I think you're right that really it's freeing in a way to know that, like, we're going to do the best we can, and we do
Hmm.
not control every outcome.
No. And really looking at those, that the idea of picking your battles. And that doesn't mean we can't control anything. And we say, okay, go ride on a motorcycle with no helmet, and then
Right.
go, there are certain things that we need to hold fast to. And then for the things that we are going to control,
Mhm.
we have to just like really hold tight to them. And so if I say you need to do something, that's the thing you need to do, but I wouldn't play that card very frequently. And so really, if you're going to pick your battles and think about the power struggles you're having with your child, if one of those was the one or two, like the things that like 0 to 10, how important for their life
Mhm.
survival are these things,
Mhm.
maybe the things that are like 10, 9, 8, and then like looking at everything else on the list and using different ways of, you could model, you could be playful, but the control factor of like you must do blank,
Mhm.
really using that tool narrowly. And when you do use it, you stick to it from the start to the end. Because what happens a lot of times, parents will try to control 90% of the stuff and then eventually give up, because the reality, we can't
You
actually
can't.
control so many of these things.
Absolutely.
And so then children just don't really believe that we're going to stick with anything, because we're kind
Right.
of overusing the
Right.
attempts at control.
Right. Can you give one example of, like, a factor that you would view, let's say, as one of the most important to control, and kind of how you'd show that while letting
Yeah.
the other stuff go?
Well, like for example, going to school. Like this is, when you're a kid, this is your job to go to school, and to be an effective human being. So like unless you are sick, unless and sick, depending on the school refusal behaviors, like, and that doesn't mean I feel sick, but like, based on the thermometer, or you're actively throwing up and I'm actually seeing it, you're not just said you just went to the bathroom and
Yeah.
threw up,
Yeah.
you are going to school because this is a muscle that you need to work to
Mhm.
learn how to be effective even when things are hard.
Right.
So like
Yeah.
this is, or like you must go to the dentist. Like I know you
Yes.
don't
Right.
want
Most kids are afraid of
this.
the dentist or shots. They
Right.
kind of have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that makes
Or
sense.
maybe like you must once a week call your if that's like a value that you have.
Right.
But it just, I think so often there's so many things we want for them and
Right.
that make the
Right.
most sense and would just be so good for them, that we spread it too thin.
That makes sense. No, I really appreciate the example. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, again, I just want to kind of state the obvious, but I thought this was interesting. The Surgeon General in 2024, this year, said parents are, experiencing an epidemic in terms of the stress that we're facing as parents. and said that the parents face the same challenges from past generations, but also new challenges like navigating technology and social media, a youth mental health crisis, and an epidemic of loneliness that has hit young people the hardest.
It's so sad for us. Like,
it's
even
really
just hearing,
sad.
I know it's all of these things, but even hearing it, it's like, this is so hard. And I treated and I have kids, and it
Yeah,
just, it's the reminders of like,
it
we're
is
in it
really hard.
together, I hope. And
Yes.
in fact, and I think people who aren't parenting at this time, it's really easy to say, just limit your kids' use of technology. It's like saying limiting oxygen. Like,
Right.
it's
It's
not,
everywhere.
none of these things are that, like,
Right.
just make your kids go do something.
Right.
When
Right.
before technology, it would get eventually boring,
To sit in front of the
eventually
screen.
would,
Yeah.
yeah. So we do have some unique
Right.
challenges. And I really was appreciative of the surge.
Yeah.
Parenting being like the new smoking
Yeah.
is, I mean, that
Yes.
really says something. I hope at least for this, the judgment part and maybe a
Absolutely.
little bit more in the compassion part, that like, this is
Yeah.
complicated.
And that's what I was going to say is that like for you to, have this book and to share with people, these are skills that we want to help you with to make it a little easier.
Hmm.
But also the way you write the book is so compassionate and
Oh.
it's so kind because I think, again, most parents really do not extend that same kindness to themselves.
Hmm.
So I'm glad that we got to talk to you about parenting and kind of learn some of these tools. I'm wondering for parents who are listening who may be interested in learning more about all of this, what resources of any kind can you share, whether they're books or podcasts or anything at all that people should be aware of?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good, you ask great questions. You're
Thank
good. This is really good. Um, the thoughts that are coming up, well, if you want, the book is available on
you. For sure,
Amazon
that one.
and
Yes,
on our Light on Anxiety website. So you're
highly
welcome
recommend it.
to access that. I think what's coming up for me is that I think there's so many resources that parents can access and often have read, and books and things, that blogs and what they're telling themselves they should be doing. And so in terms of really just turning inward, tapping into your own wise mind, and for each person what that's going to take to have faith in yourself, and listen to yourself, and just giving yourself a little bit of like, okay, what does my wise mind believe makes sense in this moment? Because the good news is you don't need any experts um, to really guide you. There's a lot of stress, and we're here to support. But you also, like, you have the answers within, and so maybe if it ever makes sense to like speak with a person, get to therapy, get some support to get in touch with that, so that you could have the confidence in yourself
Hmm.
that your answers are valid.
Yeah,
Or
no,
joining like
I
a
love
group
that.
for moms. I think
Yep.
connections, whatever it would take to,
Yeah,
in
not
this
feel so
age,
alone.
feeling connected. Yeah.
Yes. No, I think whether they're true support groups in the formal sense or they're informal, groups
Right.
of parents, talking about the
Yeah.
shared challenges, it is nice to hear that you're not alone in it.
Right.
And I think some of these podcasts, there's a new one actually called Raising Parents by Emily Astor, which I
Mhm.
thought was really a really good one. I just tapped into that for the first time, but I think it just helps us feel less alone in it. And
Yeah.
so again,
Yeah.
really thank you, Dr. Kissen, for
Yeah.
everything, for being here, for writing this book. And everyone, please check out more episodes of our podcast. Go to copingpartners.com and click on podcast and articles. And thank you as always for tuning in. And again, thank you, Dr. Kissen.
This was really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Coping Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. And check out our podcast page at copingpartners.com.